Hi everyone, Tony Tonkin here, back again, having a look at what it is that we do about anger. And you may remember from our last session, we looked at a number of issues, particularly buttons and triggers, what are our buttons and what are triggers, and how we can alleviate ourselves of those buttons by better understanding where they sit in our lives, what they are, finding ways to deal with those particular issues that cause those buttons to be pressed. We also had a conversation about anger as a feeling, as whether it was a good or a bad feeling. I guess at the end of the day, the conclusion is that anger is an emotion, just like any other feeling or emotion. It's how we respond to it that is important. So it's about our behaviour that is really important in relation to how we manage that behaviour. And it's important to understand that when people view us, they view us from the perspective of our behaviour, and they often see us perhaps as appearing angry, not only just because of our behaviour, but because they may see our eyes dilate or our faces go red, or they find themselves in a situation which normally means that we're going to explode. And so we need to be mindful of what it is that other people see in us that causes them to wonder about whether or not we're going to head to this place, which is often going to leave them feeling very uncomfortable. So they're the things that we talked about last week on the last session. So this session now we're going to talk about a range of different things. And the first thing we're going to talk about are early warning signs. So what is it that we see or notice in ourselves that would be an indicator that we're going to head to a place that's really uncomfortable for us? Now, most men would tend to say, well, look, when I'm about to become angry, I am just angry, like it's like someone just lit a fuse and off I go. That my fuse is in fact very short, that I don't have much of a time to respond. Suddenly I just find myself in this angry spot and behaving badly. And I just want to make a very important observation, I guess, which has come out of many years of working with men around their anger issues, and that is that I have never yet met a male who did not have an early warning sign. Now, I agree that sometimes it's a split second, sometimes it's a little bit longer, but I want us to think about what is it that is your early warning sign that would indicate to you that you have a choice. You can choose to act badly and hurt or harm other people, or you can choose to act appropriately and behave completely differently than the way you normally do. And there's a story I like to tell about a young man I met many years ago who was extremely angry most of the time. So if he was to score his anger out of 10, I guess he'd be about an 8 or a 9. So it didn't take much to flare him up, and then he'd become extremely violent. And he was telling us on one occasion about a time where he just exploded, and he blanked out. And after he woke up, he just found the place that he was in was just scattered with these bodies. He really lost it, and he decked everybody that was around him. And he said, I just exploded, and I didn't know what had happened, and I just lost track of time, and then I woke up, and bingo, I was in all this sort of trouble because of all the people he'd harmed. Now, when we had a conversation about actually what happened to him, what he realised and started to recognise was that he began to have a sensation whereby he noticed that from the soles of his feet up through his legs, he noticed that the temperature would slowly be rising. And as it rose and rose, you could feel it sort of welling up inside his body. And then when it got up to about halfway up across his face, he recognised that was when he lost it, and that was when he blacked out. And so even for him, who believed that he just burst into these moments of anger, he was able to understand that there was a time when he was able to consider what was happening for him, and that was heading to a place that was likely to harm other people. And so I guess what we all need to do is understand what is our early warning sign. And it could be a number of things. And when I'm running groups, I ask them to consider these three things, and they work out. They have the three columns. You might like to draw these columns on a piece of paper. The first column is your mood. So what mood are you in prior to you exploding? So a lot of people say, I'm feeling depressed, I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling rejected, I'm feeling hurt. A whole range of feelings that a person could be feeling, I guess. I'm feeling neglected. So whatever that mood is, if you could just list them on a piece of paper. So one column, mood, what are the moods that you are feeling prior to exploding? What would they be? And then if we can reflect back on all the times that we have exploded, we'll be able to find, no doubt, a mood or something that was happening. So don't think about it in terms of what other people were doing. Just think about the feelings and the emotions and the mood that was created by whatever the event might have been. What is that mood? The second column that you might like to draw up is on what is the body doing. What physiological change is happening to you during this moment where you're building up. And so some people say, like this young guy I mentioned earlier, he noticed this change in his blood, in his temperature as he was becoming angrier. And for some other people, it could be a heart racing, it could be sweating, it could be sweating palms, it could be some physiological change in their body that is producing a moment where that could be an early warning sign saying, look, I'm heading to a place that I really shouldn't be going. Now, the third area is behaviour. So behaviour can be tapping of one's feet, pacing up and down. It also could be noticing the voice, the volume of your voice rising as well. So there's a whole range of different behaviours that we may be doing that would be an indicator that we're heading to a place that we really shouldn't be going. So just think about the mood that you're in one column, just write them down, turn off this video and think about that for a moment. The body and the physical response that you might be having at that time that you're feeling angry, and the behaviour. Because what it means is that if we are able to identify a sign that tells us we're going to this other place, then we will be able to address it. We will be able to stop it. The point around, I guess the issue around behaviour is that we make a choice about how to behave. People don't make us behave in certain ways. We make choices about how it is that we wish to behave. Now, if we have a nanosecond in which to make that choice, then we have a nanosecond, but at least we have a choice. For lots of other people, they know this is building up over time. I was working with a guy recently who was extremely jealous of his partner and what she was doing. And one could see that as he became more and more catastrophizing about where she was and who she was with and all these other things, you could see his anger escalating. And it was certainly an early warning sign for him that when he started to have those thoughts about his partner and what she may or may not be doing, then that was a time where he could arrest that and choose to act and respond differently to her. The other thing too is that inquisition thing that guys get into. So when we constantly inquiring about where you've been, what you've been doing, how you've been doing it, who you've been doing it with, and all that sort of stuff, then that is a sign. If we know we're going to that place, then that is a sign as well. There's things that we think about before we explode that tell us that we're going to a place. So we need to become really, really aware of what those signs are so that we can then actively do something to stop the behaviour that follows. It doesn't mean that those signs, the heart racing, whatever, are going to be extremely detrimental to us. Even sometimes the thinking stuff, the destructive type thinking that people have can be necessarily is going to be unhelpful, providing we don't go to that place where we're acting badly. We need to address the thinking, and we need to eventually be able to say, well, yeah, that's really unhelpful. Why actually am I behaving or thinking in that way? And then, later on, we certainly need to be able to address the physiological response that a lot of these things have as well. We need to be able to address all of these particular issues. But at the end of the day, if we're not behaving badly, then that gives us the space to address all of those issues as opposed to having them flare up into what could be basically seen as just bad behaviour. Remember that this is about keeping other people safe, and it's also about ensuring that the relationships that we have are built and established on solid ground. They're not based on someone being fearful of who we are and how we may choose to respond to them, because at the end of the day, that's just unhelpful. And so what we want to talk about also is that moment where you do explode. Like, what is that moment like for you? How does that impact you, and how does that impact other people that are around us? So we're going to talk for most of this session about the anger cycle, and what does the anger cycle look like. And I want you to start to think about, how do I fit within that anger cycle? So what are my experiences of my involvement in the anger cycle? Now, the anger cycle incorporates a compilation of feelings and behaviours that people experience. The aim is to break this cycle by developing skills to express yourself assertively. Don't let things build up. Don't be motivated by guilt, as this leads you to setting unrealistic goals. Use time out, acknowledge your anger feelings, use I statements, and avoid blaming others for how you feel. All of these skills will help you break that particular anger cycle. Now, we're going to talk about time out, we're going to talk about assertion during this course, we're going to talk about I statements, and we're soon going to talk about avoid blaming. So all those things that we talked about in terms of that introduction to the anger cycle are things which we will be discussing and which will help you to understand where you sit within that cycle and how you can break the cycle. So this isn't about staying in the cycle, this is about discovering ways that we can break through the cycle so that we're no longer committing the harm that we might be doing to other people through expressing our anger in unhelpful ways. So the way the cycle looks is just like this. So at the top you can see we've got the explosion, which is an aggressive behaviour. It's that idea that I'm right and you're wrong. It's intimidating behaviour. So it's wanting to punish or hurt another person. It's demanding, it's blaming, it's name-calling, shouting, yelling, lashing out. And I want you to think about, are any of these things that I do? And I'm pretty sure that for most of you, you could identify specific behaviours out of that list that you are involved in. Following the explosion comes this really interesting place, which we call the aftermath. Now, in the aftermath, we're apologising, we realise we've done some harm, we're very regretful most of the time for having done it. So we apologise, we promise it will never happen again. And I don't know how many of us have actually said that. Some time ago, I was working with a guy and his partner separately, and he was always, forever, apologising for the things that he had done and said to this poor old woman. And I think that it was, every time he apologised, she kept on wondering, well, does he actually mean this? Because he just does the same thing, then he apologises. So what, at the end of the day, what does the apology mean? Well, it means very little, perhaps nothing at all, if you keep apologising then continuing with the bad behaviour. So, but this is what we do. After the explosion, there's the aftermath. We apologise, we promise that it will never happen again. We blame ourselves for it, we feel crappy about it, and we feel guilty, remorseful, and then often we sulk because we just realise that we shouldn't have done whatever it was that we've done. And then we get to this really fascinating part of the cycle called the false calm. And now it's in the false calm that we think about ourselves as being perfect. We're kind of the martyr. So I said what I said and I did what I did because I was looking after her best interests. It was a good thing that I did because I am a caring and loving person, and I love this other person dearly, and that I didn't wish to harm her at all, and so. But at the same time, we're thinking, well, I'm going to be on my best behaviour. So those gutters that we've been talking about cleaning for a long, long time, we're sort of going to clean the gutters, we clean out the dishwasher, we sweep the floors, vacuum the floors. We're doing all the right things at this time, and we're extremely agreeable, primarily because of the guilt that we feel from having caused some crappy behaviour. So we decided to not rock the boat. We don't say anything sometimes. Sometimes guys become extremely passive and withdrawn during this phase because they realise that they have done some harm and damage to others. At the same time, some men are trying to justify what it is that they've done. So we've gone through the aftermath of it all, we felt really guilty, and then we decide, well, okay, things aren't too bad now. I can actually rectify this problem by just not doing anything sometimes. So once we're in the false calm, the thing about the false calm that really irritates me is that I think that it is the most egocentric, self-centered part of who we are. It's absolutely disgusting to think that we as men, after this explosion and our feeling of guilt and everything else, go into this place where we are not taking responsibility for what it is that we've done. And this is a dangerous place to be, because following from here, it starts to build up again. So we start to become irritable, tense, stressed out. We start concocting thoughts in our heads which are unhelpful. We're impatient, we're intolerant, we're blaming others for everything. We feel walked over. Now we're starting to stamp our feet, starting to, say this is our turf, this is what's important to us. We're deciding not to listen to other people, and the sense of resentment starts to escalate in our thinking until we get to this point where we think, bugger it, and we explode again. Now, for many people, or for everybody actually, this cycle can be seen in a number of different ways. It could be something which happens daily. It can be something which happens, once a week, or once a month, or once a year. It doesn't matter how often it happens. The fact that it happens at all is unhelpful. Many years ago, when I first started practicing, I met a couple who were at that point, I guess they were in their 50s, and she was telling me that when they first got married, and they were in their early 20s at that time, he hit her, he punched her, and she said that's the only time he's been physically violent. He's actually found other ways to control and dominate her in the meantime, and the relationship's been a terrible relationship for the whole period. But the thing that makes this relationship so bad is that from that first moment that she was hit, she has been waiting for that moment again. And I think that's a terrible way to live your life. And it's been terrible for her. And she was looking for a way out because she could no longer live like that anymore. So it doesn't matter whether that violence happens, hourly, weekly, monthly, yearly, or once. The fact that it happens is enough to cause someone to feel afraid for the most of their lives, or for as long as they have that relationship. And we must find a way to be able to break through that. So my argument here is that we can either make a choice. We either choose not to go to that explosive stage ever again. So we're looking at our early warning signs and we're saying, okay, these are things that I'm doing and feeling and behaving that would indicate to me I'm going to a place that I should not go. So I'm never going to explode. But if we go to that place and we do explode, the question we need to be asking ourselves is, at what stage of this cycle am I going to pull out? Am I going to make a commitment not to revisit the other parts of this cycle. And I think the best part to go, if you've exploded, the best part to go is to this apology and promises part, which is the second, the aftermath. And it's never to revisit the false calm, where this notion about being perfect and that we're the martyr and that we're on our best behaviour and all that other sort of stuff. That it's at that point in the aftermath we start taking responsibility for our behaviour and we start looking at the impact that it has on others. Because one of the most important questions we need to ask ourselves when we're looking at the anger cycle is, where does the other person sit on this cycle? And I've asked that question thousands of times in my groups, and most people struggle to tell me. So just think for a moment. Where on this cycle do you think your partner is after you've exploded? Where are they? Just think about that for a moment. I'll tell you. I hope you've got an answer, because I'll tell you where they are. They're at the explosion stage. So people who experience violence remain in that moment where they were violated, and they cannot shift from that moment. So while you're busily going through the aftermath, the false calm and the build-up stage, the other person is sitting in that moment of explosion. And that is a terrible place for a lot of people to be. A frightening place. It's like having a prison sentence. It's like being locked up into this place from which, for many people, they can't escape. But we, as men in particular, can take responsibility for how we choose to behave so that people, women in particular, don't find themselves locked into that place of explosion. And remember what we said last week too, is that it's important to understand that when we can talk about our feelings and our emotions, particularly how we feel when we're angry, then we build intimacy in relationships. When we're trapped in this anger cycle, regardless of how often it happens, we cannot be intimate. We cannot be close to the other person. Sometimes us as men believe that sex will be the solution, that by having sex is the way by which I feel loved. No, having sex is the way by which you might choose to ejaculate. It doesn't necessarily mean that the other person will feel loved. If you are in a violent relationship, I can assure you they will not feel loved, and your relationship will never be what it is that you would like it to be or what the other person needs it to be. So I'd like you to think about some of these ideas that we're talking about in terms of the anger cycle and what's important for you to understand. I'd like to finish on this particular note, and that is just having a look at time out. So time out is a process, I guess, that you can use, and I've put the slide up here so you can have a look at it. So time out is like, I've noticed these early warning signs. I know that I don't want to go to this cycle stuff again, so I'm going to do something about it. So I'm going to tell my partner that I'm going to have to take time out. Now, time out is not a total solution. Time out is an interim solution that you can use as you're working through some of these other issues that we'll be talking about throughout this course. So the first thing you do is you negotiate this with a person. So you say to them, I'm going to take time out. And this is what time out means. Time out means I tell them I'm taking time out. I haven't exploded. I'm feeling that all the early warning signs are happening, and I'm going to take some time out. So you remove yourself from the situation. So that doesn't mean you go into the next room or you go out into the garden. It does mean you remove yourself from the location, namely the house or the home or the flat or wherever you might be, and preferably you go for a walk. You use up some of that energy that's inside of you. You expend it by going out and having a stroll. Take the dog for a walk if you've got a dog. But leave the home, right? Because women feel safer when they know that you've left the home if you're going to a place that they've often found very uncomfortable. Use it as a way by which you can release your tension so that you're no longer feeling as angry. And when you're walking around, think about what it is that you were thinking. What were the dangerous ideas that you were cooking up that were causing you to feel more and more angry? Address those issues while you're out on your walk. Wonder about, why was I thinking that? Was that really helpful? How could that have impacted her if I'd followed through on some of those thoughts? Then think about, how am I going to be when I return? What am I going to be thinking that is a little bit different? And how are those thoughts going to impact her? So think about, when you get back, what can I say to her that will assure her that she's safe? And if you come back and she says to you, I don't want to talk about it right now, accept that as her way of dealing with the issue, because you need to remember that if she'd known and sensed that your anger was building up and you've now taken time out, she's not necessarily certain that you're going to behave appropriately when you return. You might have to do this a number of times before she becomes confident that you're going to behave appropriately. So the next thing that you need to do is, she says, I don't want to talk about it now. You say, that's fine. Let's talk about it some other time when you feel more comfortable. Let me know when that is, and I'll tell you what was happening for me. That's a good thing to do. If she's okay with you talking about it when you come back, then talk about it. But also remember to ask her how she felt about how you were at that time when you chose to take time out, whether she was aware that you were becoming angry, and whether she appreciated the fact that you took some time out, you came back and you talked openly about what was happening for you. But when you come back, don't do the blame thing. Don't say, I became angry because you, right? Think about where that anger's coming from and why it is there. Because often the anger that we experience has nothing to do with the other person. Nothing to do with it whatsoever. We think it has, but it hasn't, because we can look back and see many other occasions where we've been angry and it hasn't been about this person at all. We are just angry because we're not being acknowledged, we're feeling neglected, we're feeling resentful, and it could be about a whole host of stuff that has nothing to do with this particular person. So think about all of that stuff, come back, resolve the issue if you can. If you can't resolve it, then resolve it later on. Thanks very much for being with me on session 2. Really look forward to being with you again when we do session 3. Thanks very much. Bye.